Hi Alex, how you doing? Can you hear me? Cassandra, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
Maybe it's a matter of connection, maybe just connecting to the audio in the quick start tab.
Yeah.
You can, if Alex can hear us.
Yeah. I did mute, Alex, I did mute all the participants, so they have to actively...
Yes.
So Alex, if you can check that. Still very quiet here.
Yeah, it is.
But please follow the link here. Is this the same one?
And then we just kind of write
The meeting that Eva sent, I feel that it looks like another one. The meeting has ended. Well, I did send everybody the invitation, and you did not get it, but
I received invitation for the one that, like I said in the email, like the double one, which we created, which were not good at the end. But not for this one.
Yeah, but this one should I can hear you. No, I can't hear you, Alex.
Maybe just, yeah, it's maybe just a question of connecting to audio. If
Yeah. Hi, Aki, how are you doing? Fine. Maybe I will shut out the videos, because the list is becoming like this. Alex? Alex? Hi, Aki.
Hello.
Second time, best time, huh?
Yes, we're done this time. I hope so.
Well, they don't have an Asia regional meeting, and oh yeah, some of them have actually, huh? But,
yes, hopefully, hopefully. What a pity, huh?
Yeah.
But you think Asia will be able to join now or not?
I think it's not that late in Asia, but what time would it be now in Asia? I think
6 hours. Let me see.
Okay. Yeah, it's already 9 o'clock almost.
Yeah, no, they won't make it. And I haven't seen their names on the email sent by Eva to confirm.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well.
Okay, let me see what Eva said. We have two at least we have 5 people that actively confirmed to participate. So, and the other 17 did not mention anything.
No, huh? Yeah.
Which is a good or bad sign, let's see. And then Africa, only 3 out of the 45. Hi Eva, how are you doing?
I'm good. Hello, Carl. How are you?
I'm fine.
Okay, great. I just sent you an email with an updated list of participants.
Yes, exactly. It's all the time becoming less and less.
Yeah, it's just the people that like replied to my Outlook invitation. So not everybody reacted to that, but some did, and that is the result. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, we still have 15 years to go. Huh? So we still have 15 years to go to get everybody on board.
15 years, yeah.
That's an SDG joke, huh?
Okay. SDG is only 14, no?
Yeah, exactly. 14 years and 4 months. So how much will it be now? No, 14 years and 3 months. 1 minute.
Carl, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Alex.
Okay, I'm trying to figure out how this system works, but I think I have it now all clear. I've got an unmute button here, and then the camera, so I can stop the video. I can see how it works. Excellent.
Yeah, that's the trick. Everybody who enters the platform is automatically put on mute.
Yeah.
It's just to avoid anybody making a lot of noise when they enter into the webinar.
No, it makes perfect sense. I only just saw it now, so
yeah.
So we might need an SDG 18 on racing away from the SDG.
Or technology, that's already, isn't it somewhere there in the technology part, access to internet, or what's the...
One of the means of implementation, indeed.
Yeah.
So anyway, Carl, shall I mute then, or you tell?
I think let me quickly already brief you on how it more or less would look like. I will just quickly introduce the webinar, set out a little bit of the ground rules, and then then I will give the floor to Wolfgang. 7-8 minutes, a few question and answers, if there are question and answers. And then I will hand over to you, Alex, also for like 7-8 minutes.
Okay, excellent.
Okay, so I propose like in 15 minutes that we come back again and that we then start the webinar.
Okay, Carl, there's a couple of documents that I should have perhaps sent you last week, but I guess we're still inside, no?
You can also send them now to me, and then we will upload them.
Okay, then I'll send them to you in the next few minutes.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye.
See you in a minute.
Yeah, good. Tell me, there are some documents I had put in the folder.
Yes.
It's not on mute here, Carl? You hear me?
I can hear you loud and
No,
clear.
let me mute. I was talking to Eva about these document resources.
Okay, yeah. See you in 10 minutes, huh?
It's on the learning platform, but it doesn't come out on the first page. Below participants, you have resources.
Okay.
On the platform. Okay, so I'll mention that it is on the platform. It's okay.
I will do
No,
that.
it's okay. Yes, Carl?
I will do it. I will put it, the link to the platform.
Oh, good, good.
Hello?
Hello.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Laetitia Dumas.
Hi, Leticia. We're starting in a few minutes. We're still waiting for a bit more people.
Okay, perfect. I put the mic on mute.
Exactly. Thanks a lot, huh?
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Wolfgang. I propose a few minutes more, so in order that we can maybe have some last-minute participants added to the webinar. Good afternoon, everybody. good morning for others. My name is Karel Pfeffer. I will be facilitating this webinar. And welcome in our webinar, which is focused on delivering the SDGs at country level in line with the UNDSS processes. It's already more than a year ago that the SDGs were launched, and many countries are actually in the process of domesticating and landing the SDGs at country level. And hence, they will rely more and more on ILO expertise in supporting them in the whole mainstreaming of SDGs, particularly from a decent work perspective. Now, our entry point for today to the SDGs is the ILO and the UN in general. And as you could see in the objectives for this webinar, in the next hour and 15 minutes, we will work on the following 3 topics. Decent work and the SDGs, the perspective of a UN joint programming, where we have the colleague calling in from the United Nations in New York, and finally funding and partnership opportunities. Now, before I give the floor to Wolfgang, who will be our first expert on the link between the ILO and the decent work agenda, I would quickly like to describe the flow of this webinar. Since we have very limited time, we will get expert input from around 7 to 8 minutes, where afterwards I want to open the floor for some questions or concerns or observations regarding the input provided. I also would like to highlight the opportunity to use the chat box that we are having. If you have questions while you are listening to the presentation, please formulate your questions in the chat box so that we can also ask them afterwards to the experts. In terms of background material, so this webinar will not fall back on PowerPoint presentations as such, but you will find all the materials related to the specific presentations on the DC Development Cooperation Learning Platform. So if you have not been there yet, I would strongly recommend you to have a look. You will find all the materials there. And finally, I hope this is not too uncomfortable, but we will be recording this webinar so that we can also use it afterwards for those colleagues that were unable to participate in this webinar. So without further ado, I would like to open the floor for Wolfgang Schiffer from Multilaterals to go deeper into the link between decent work and the SDGs. Wolfgang, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I hope everybody can hear me. Is this okay?
I can hear you loud and clear, Wolfgang.
Okay, then let's delve into it. Okay, welcome everybody to this very interesting webinar, which forms part of the DC Regional Learning Journeys. I would like to give you a little bit of an introduction and context with regards to the Decent Work Agenda and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And for that, looking at 4 aspects. First, the characteristics and process of the 2030 Agenda. Then what does it all mean for us, for the ILO, and for the Decent Work Agenda. Then opportunities emanating from the Decent Work Agenda, and then what do we need to do at the regional country level and also at the global level. All right, so I'll go through that, and then please do ask any questions that you might have. After that, if you really feel something is really important, just note it down in a text message, and we'll take it up as we discuss it. So first, the process. Of course, the 2030 Agenda emanated from a rather long process, and we can go quite some ways back. In 2012, we had the Rio+20 conference, which called for a set of sustainable development goals, and sort of brought the 3 threads of sustainable development together, addressing the economic, social, and the environmental dimensions. So that's a very important conference and outcome for us to keep in mind, because it's these 3 dimensions that come out of the 2030 Agenda as we have it now. Another important aspect for you to have a look at and read up on if you have not done so is the Addis Ababa Action Agenda. That's basically the financing track of the 2030 Agenda that happened in July 2015. From an ILO perspective, from a decent work perspective, a very useful conference, of course bringing together quite a number of processes and strands, but basically pointing out that decent work is both a means and an end for sustainable development, and that decent work are a key aspect in bringing about the goals that we strive for in the 2030 Agenda. Then we of course had the summit which adopted the agenda, and now recently in July 2016 there was the UN level review conference for the progress on the Agenda 2030, the high-level political forum. That's important for you to know because that will be the regular review mechanism every year in July to look at where we stand on the Agenda 2030 and where we're going. So both from a global, regional and country level, that'll be the process in which sort of we feed in our reports as UN agencies, as ILO. But also at the country level, you will find that your countries, if they have volunteered to be voluntary reporting countries, will prepare for that reporting in July. So it's a good engagement point for you to connect to governments and constituents. What are the characteristics then of the 2030 Agenda? Well, it's an open and an inclusive process. Some have termed it as the largest democratic process in the world. Indeed, there was a rather wide scoping and collecting of views leading up to the 2030 Agenda. And that was based on a certain vision. The vision is that the 2030 Agenda, and that's in contrast to the more operational MDGs, should be transformative, it should be universal, and it should be rights-based. So if you look at it, you have something that we didn't have before. Previously, parts of these aspects were parked, as it were, in the Millennium Declaration. In particular, the inclusion of a rights-based and a universal approach is a new aspect and is very opportune and a good process for us as the ILO. I mentioned the reporting via the high-level political forum already. One associated aspect with that is the 2030 Agenda is closely connected to the ongoing process of UN reform. The UN needs to change the way that we are working, both inside but also with other partners. So the UN Fit for Purpose Agenda, and connected to that also our approach, the ILO's approach to reform, to work differently, are very important aspects in making sure that we can deliver to our constituents the services, the tools, the knowledge that are required to implement the 2030 Agenda. Of course, the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs are rather huge. We have 17 SDGs, we have 169 targets, we have, depending how you count, around 240, 250 targets. So the scope is immense. And one good idea, the way that I look at it always, is to kind of structure this a little bit. And you can do that if you structure it according to the 5 Ps that are set out in the 2030 Agenda. And those are people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnerships. If you depict the 2030 Agenda, the SDGs, basically broadly the first row is the people agenda. It deals with poverty, it deals with health and education. Then the next row of the SDGs, that's the prosperity. That's also where the combined goal of decent work and sustained and sustainable development is situated, the goal 8. Then further you move into the social and environmental dimension. That's the planet part. And then you have goal 16 on peaceful society. And you have 17 on partnerships. So what does this mean for us? What does it mean for the ILO and the Decent Work Agenda? Well, first, decent work is well embedded in the 2030 Agenda. depending on how you look at it, between 30 and 50% of all targets have a decent work element. It will require, as I mentioned, a new way of working and thinking. So we have two integrated agendas, the decent work agenda and the 2030 agenda, which we now will need to merge and work on. For that, if you want to know more, I've prepared a screencast which sets out this challenge of two integrated agendas. Well, I invite you to look at that. It's part of this webcast. Then at the technical level, we have good intervention models for the decent work agenda that we need to think through. And we need to also think how we can implement these decent work approaches in support of the SDGs. We have, of course, standard approaches like our work on child labor or work on green jobs, for example. But what's the connection to the SDGs? That's also the guidance we received from the ILC via the Social Justice Declaration resolution. And if you want to look a little bit closer into this, you can also see that's already built into our new program and budget proposal for 2018-2019. There, the GB requested us to look exactly at that aspect. How do decent work elements contribute to SDGs as they are set out in the Agenda 2030? Then we will need to work via partnerships. Good example, SDG 8, which combines decent work, but also ask for sustained and sustainable development, a strength in terms of expertise, which is partly resident in the ILO, but also, of course, in particular in the Bretton Woods institutions. So clearly, we need to work together with others. In fact, no one SDG is owned by one agency. So in a sense, across the SDGs, we will need to look out for partnerships and cooperate as the opportunities arise, but also lead when it is necessary. And we will need to communicate differently, I would think. You can see quite some innovative work that DCOM has done in that respect. If you look at our website, you find an app that you can download on your mobile phone, which sets out the connection between decent work and the 2030 agenda, also with regards to standards that are, of course, an important part of our work. Now, what are the opportunities? I've mentioned a couple already. In my view, there are four. Firstly, there's decent work and inclusive growth are now in one go. So there is a platform for the sort of partnerships and the policy coherence and the integrated policy advice on SDGs that we have striven for before the SDGs, but now it's out in the open, as it were. Now it's a decision of member states that this should happen. So our way of working that we have already implemented previously is now, for want of a better word, mainstream in the UN system and beyond. Secondly, ILO norms and standards are embedded more broadly in the international development framework. I mentioned that previously in the MDG area, this was not the case. So now, again, the way we are working based on norms and standards forms part of broader UN country operations. And then thirdly, our flagship reports and our supervisory mechanism information in that context can be put to better use. Then fourth, the UNCTs at the country level will support member states and also our constituents in the implementation of the 2030 agenda and the SDGs. So we have partners there which with whom we can cooperate at the country level. If you look at the UNCT now, their task is to implement an agenda which has these three dimensions that I mentioned: the economic, the environmental, and the social and rights dimension. Hence, the way that we are working has a broader resonance in the UNCTs. And therefore, even in countries where we're not residents, we now have a better opportunity to work towards decent work as a means and an end for sustainable development. And that leads me to the fourth aspect I wanted to share with you by way of an introduction. What needs to be done at the global, regional, and country level? So let's look just at two aspects here. First of all, the GB just finished. We had a clear instruction by the GB and previously also by the ILC already that we should engage in the global mechanism of the SDGs and the monitoring and progress reporting and policy development towards SDG implementation. And the vehicle for that is the HLPF, the High-Level Political Forum. And what we have been asked to do is to institute a regular discussion at the GB. First will be next March, to allow our constituents and also partners that we might invite to discuss the respective theme of the High-Level Political Forum from a world of work perspective and then contribute that to the discussion in New York. So as you can see, our governance structure has taken up the challenge, but also the opportunity of the Agenda 2030 quite seriously. So regularly we'll have a mechanism in how we can contribute and engage at the global level. Now at the regional level, I would think that the regional commissions will have a key role in monitoring and reporting, also in particular towards the HLPF and for transboundary issues, so environment, migration might be some. They also have a role in aggregating national progress reports and contributing to the indicator and data compilation. So also there, from a regional perspective, a useful engagement point for us. And finally, at the national level, we will need to support constituents, build their capacity to engage in the processes that are being set up. And Alex will brief us on the UN process there, the MAPS and the UNDAF. And we will need to design SDG-sensitive decent work country programs. You've seen the new guidance that came out in August, which tries to cater for that. And we are also preparing a capacity support tool here at headquarters, which sets out the contribution of decent work in various thematic areas to the respective SDGs, which will be very useful for your mainstreaming of decent work in SDGs processes, whether that's national action plans, whether there's UNDAFs, or whether indeed in the preparation for the decent work country program. So, vast field. I hope I gave you a good introduction and overview, and I look forward to your questions and the discussion.
Thanks a lot, Wolfgang. This was a nice power talk on the SDGs, from Rio +20 to last week's governing body. We have time for one or two questions, since I didn't want to interrupt Wolfgang, but he took a little bit more time, because I thought it was very interesting. So if there are a few questions, we still have a few minutes for that one, for those ones. And I also refer to the screencast. The screencast is available on the DC Learning platform, together with another presentation of Wolfgang, for those that want to know more about it. Well, I assume silence is understanding. One time, another time. Okay. Thanks. If you still have questions, you can always use the chat. I think that's still the easiest way of asking questions. So please use that tool which is available. And then I also want to invite now Alex Warren Rodriguez from UN DOCO on MAPS and UNDAF processes. Alex?
Good morning, Carl. Good afternoon to the colleagues participating in the webinar. Just to double check, you can hear me well?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Very good, okay. First, let me start by thanking you, Carl and Isla, for inviting me to participate in this webinar. It's for me an opportunity to reach out to colleagues in different agencies, working at the country level and outside the New York team. So thank you very much. And also thank Wolfgang for a very good first presentation, setting the scene for lots of what I'm going to be presenting in the next few minutes. So Let me just, as Wolfgang stated, there's been a lot of things happening at the global, regional, and country level over the last year in terms of SDG implementation. I'll be talking about system-wide initiatives of the system, of the UN development system in support of the SDGs. Now, taking from the signing and gathering of the 2030 agenda last year, the UN Development Group agreed to a number of principles and co-actions that are supposed to guide the work of the UN development system and the UN Development Group in particular over the next 15 years. This is a document that I made available through Carl, and it would be good if you have a chance to read it. It identifies a number of key areas of work. One of them is integration across the charter, so the need for the system to work together in different pillars, whether it's the humanitarian side, development side, peacekeeping, or its normative work, and make sure that we provide integrated support to an agenda which is integrated, as Wolfgang rightly put it. The other key area of intervention in which the UN system wants to come together and support member states on the SDGs is around this common approach of MAPS, mainstreaming, acceleration, and policy support. A third area in which the UN principles, the heads of the United Nations development agencies agreed to work on, is on sort of joint programming based on evidence, UNDAP, and standard operating procedures. And then there's other three elements, which is the need to improve our business operations, strengthen our partnerships approaches. As Wolfgang rightly said, the agenda is a partnership agenda that requires everybody to be involved, and the UN can play a key role as a catalyst of partnership, as a facilitator, as a convener, both at the global, regional, and country level. And then finally, the final area of work is on leadership. So I will focus my brief presentation on three areas, which is the ones that I've just given, which is MAPS, then the work that we're doing on the UNDAP guidelines, and then finally, just touch briefly on the work that we're doing to support national SDG review processes, which hopefully will feed into the presentations that countries around the world do at the HLPF, at the high-level political forum that Wolfgang was talking about. So those, briefly, I'll focus on those three areas. Before I do that, though, let me just say that what we're seeing, at least here in DOCO, is that there's actually a lot of work being done by our colleagues in the field in supporting the SDGs. I believe that many governments see us as a trusted partner, as a partner that has the capacity and expertise in this area. And what we're collecting is, so far we have, out of 131 UN country teams that exist around the world, we have 100 of them reporting that they've been approached by member states requesting our colleagues in the field to provide support on the SDGs. So that is around 75% of UN country teams already actively working on the SDGs, and they've been doing so for more than a year, actually, because even before the SDGs were formally adopted, there was already work going on in that area. A lot of the work that has been going on is essentially about helping land the agenda at the country level, mainstreaming work, and a lot of work around indicators, trying to translate global indicator frameworks for the SDGs at the national level. So it's with this in mind that colleagues here in DOCO and in the UNDG, and that also involves colleagues in ILO, have been working on a number of initiatives. The first one, as I mentioned, is MAPS. MAPS was adopted as a common approach of the UN Development Group for its upstream policy support to the implementation of the SDGs. MAPS, as many of you probably know by now, stands for mainstreaming, so that's the M, acceleration, and then policy support, the PS. The idea behind MAPS is this is not a plan, it's not a strategy, it's a common approach that captures what we believe is the essence of our work, which has the essence of our work in the past and also in support of the SDGs, which is about mainstreaming. That means helping land the agenda through raising awareness, in program countries, working with governments to adapt global indicator framework to the national plans, mainstreaming the SDGs in national plans, national budgets, and all that type of work. So that is the mainstreaming. Acceleration is this idea that we have 15 years to implement a very ambitious agenda, and therefore a lot of our work should maybe focus on identifying, working with our government counterparts and identifying key areas where there's constraints in achieving progress in sustainable development, and then defining policies that can unlock accelerated progress to achieve the SDGs by 2030. And then the policy support involves, making sure that we provide all our best knowledge and capacity and expertise in an integrated manner to the implementation of the SDGs at the country level. On the MAPS initiative, what we've been working on is to provide tools and resources to our colleagues in the field. So, for instance, on the mainstreaming, we launched almost about a year ago a mainstreaming reference guide, which has a lot of resources and tools in the form of links, background documents, reference material on how to do mainstreaming work on the SDGs. This mainstreaming reference guide is now available in English, French, and Spanish. We're working right now on an update of this reference guide, which should be available, the updated version, in the next few weeks. And we're putting that on an online platform as well. So this is on the mainstreaming. On the policy, on the acceleration, some colleagues in UNDP and UNICEF are working on coming up with an acceleration toolkit, which will be a set of tools, existing tools, maybe some new tools, that can help colleagues in country teams and also member states to do analysis on acceleration and focus on areas such as last mile analysis, integration, and those kinds of things. So this is on the maps. Now, let me very quickly go into the UNDAP guidelines. For the last year, we've been working on in DOCO and the UNDG on coming up with an updated version of the UNDAP guidelines. The previous version was of 2010, and we thought that with a new agenda, we needed a new set of guidelines that spoke to the request by member states for the UN to come together in a coherent and integrated manner in support of SDG implementation. So on the UNDAP guidelines, an interim version was launched about 4 or 5 months ago. Now we're working on a revised version based on some of the feedback that we're already getting from colleagues rolling out UNDAS at the country level. There's a number of key innovations in the UNDAS guidelines. Now, first of all, we revised the core programming principles. So now we have 4 programming principles, an overarching principle, which is this commitment and pledge to leave no one behind. So the idea is that the work of the UN over the next 15 years should focus as much as possible on making sure that no one is left there behind in the attainment of the SDGs. And this in all dimensions, whether it's a poverty dimension, an employment dimension, a health dimension, etc. Then we've have 3 other core program principles, which are about human rights, gender equality, and women's empowerment, one. A second one on sustainability and resilience, and then a 4th one on accountability. This commitment to remain accountable and also promote accountability in the work and through the work that we do. And then we've come up, but then I can go more into detail later in the Q&A, with a number of innovations in the UNDAP guidelines, which are looking into promoting integrated approaches to programming that take into account issues of risk management, data, partnership, system thinking, policy coherence, and cross-chart integration. And then just finally, very briefly, I said I was covering 3 areas. One is the maps, the second is the UNDAP, and then the third area is the work that we're doing to support country-level reviews on the SDGs. So, as Wolfgang was saying, the follow-up and review process on the SDGs culminates every year in the high-level political forum that takes place on an annual basis in June, July. But these high-level political forum, the national reviews of SDG implementation at the global level, we believe need to be informed by similar review processes at the country level. So we've been working on the production of a set of guidelines to help UN country teams to support member states to undertake these national reviews based on the experience that we have of conducting similar MDG reviews and MDG reports in the last 15 years. So the idea is that we try to encourage member states to promote reviews which are based on principles of mutual accountability, inclusiveness, policy dialogue, analytical approaches to SDG reviews, etc. These guidelines are in the making, and they should be available publicly within the next few weeks before the agenda. So having said that, I think, Carl, I'll stop here, and then maybe we can open the floor for some Q&A to see if people have any questions or need for clarification. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex. I think you got the message over regarding MAPs, UNDAP guidelines focusing on coherence and integration and support to national governments in the national review and SDG implementation. But I got a few questions, and I think one in particular could actually be addressed to yourself, but also to Wolfgang. The question is actually how ILO will address the challenges prevailed in conflict settings where there is a very weak role of our constituents, including government. So the question is basically how can we achieve sustainable development in a state of conflict where a lot of the Arab countries are? Wolfgang or Alex, any suggestions from your side?
Well, maybe I can give it a first try. And indeed, it's a very pertinent question, and I think if you really look at it, it goes a little bit beyond what can we do in conflict settings. The question is how can you implement a universal agenda and still do justice to the respective country setting, as it were. And I think that's one of the strengths of the 2030 agenda, but in fact, if you look at it, also of the decent work agenda, that of course, whatever happens and whatever we do on the ground needs to be based on a proper analysis and need assessment on the context in which the Agenda 2030 and the SDGs are addressed. Now, in my mind, and there's a second thought I wanted to share, and I had discussed it already with other colleagues. In the end, that will mean sort of a slightly different type of prioritization exercise, and probably also outcome of the exercise. The 17 SDGs and the 169 targets are too many and are too broad for given country settings, and that's not only true for conflict settings, also for example, small island developing states, landlocked countries, LDC. So I guess the trick is in the preparatory work for implementing the SDGs, making sure that whatever we do, the analysis and the prioritization process does justice to whatever complexities and situations we see on the ground. And then you move on from there with a constituent-led priority setting process. Thanks.
Thanks, Wolfgang. Alex?
Yes, I mean, I don't have any concrete answer to that question, but just sort of to say that I think this is something which has been, sorry, am I? Yeah, no, this is something that has been, is currently being discussed, and at least here in New York, this idea of working on the humanitarian development excellence. Now, and it's trying to get people working in humanitarian settings, in crisis settings, to understand that ultimately, whilst you need to address the immediate emergency needs of these countries, you need to also at the same time work on the sort of underlying drivers of development that might help address some of these situations of conflict or emergency. So there's been a lot of thought put into this. I think it comes largely to get the humanitarian pillar of the UN, agencies working on humanitarian response and crisis, to think also about development. And I think it's also for those agencies which have more of a development background or a normative role to also think about what does it mean working in crisis context. So as I said, I don't have a concrete answer to that question, no, but yeah, it's something which is ongoing, this thinking of, we need to bring these two worlds, or maybe three worlds, also the normative agenda together, and try to find ways of addressing the development, the root causes of underdevelopment and crisis in some of these countries.
Thanks, Alex. Just to sum up, I think Wolfgang mentioned the priority of, setting priorities and setting the right priorities. And Alex, you mentioned actually, well, we have to put a little bit of humanitarian aid in development work as such, and also vice versa for humanitarian aid also to focus on issues of development.
Well, yes, an afterthought on this point. I mean, we're working on some very concrete, specific measures to make that happen, at least at the UN level. So what you have typically in crisis or humanitarian settings, you have the UN country team, the development part, working under the hat of the reference coordinator, and then you have the humanitarian team working separately under the hat of the humanitarian coordinator. So you have typically two teams working in a similar setting. So what we want is these two teams or these two parts of the UN to work together and do things such as sort of common planning frameworks, common risk analysis, common country analysis, so that at least in terms of the UN at the country level, we all speak in the same language and we have a common understanding of what are the problems in these settings. Humanitarian crisis, but also developmental.
Thanks, Alex. Maybe somebody from the participants that want to add to the short discussion? If not, I have another question here, and this is more directly directed to Wolfgang, because it's an ILO issue. But the question is, how is the ILO implementation plan being implemented on the Sustainable Development Goals? Wolfgang.
Well, thanks. That's also a wide field, of course. Okay, the implementation plan was issued in March of this year. And I mean, you can broadly structure the action streams that were set out in there in 3, 4, 5 clusters. I would think if you look at structuring it, you have work on capacity building, both for ILO officials and constituents. You have the requirement to, as I mentioned before, communicating differently, making sure that the work that we're doing is presented in a manner that the target audience understands how we are contributing, how decent work contributes to the SDGs. Then there's work for us to do internally in terms of enhancing our knowledge base, making sure that whatever we do in terms of research work, in terms of policy work, is now geared towards the SDGs. And finally, I guess there's some organizational work to be done. We need to make sure that whatever we have in terms of coordination activities inside the office, but also with others, is sort of SDG sensitive, as it were. Where did we progress well and where are we behind? I guess it's the latter two areas where we're still struggling a little bit in putting everything together. I mean, it's getting there, but the strong points of the SDG implementation plan, which is of course a huge task that the Director General has rightly put out. I think the strength is so far in the areas of communication. I mentioned a couple of activities in that respect. And just have a look at our website. You'll see that this works already fairly well, and we're working on more. The other one is capacity building, and there, of course, we also have worked with Carl and his colleagues with the ITC and put together a course for officials already on decent work and sustainable development, a course for ACTRAF, and also, and I believe it was even part of the package here for our webinar, an e-learning course for ILO officials to acquaint themselves with the 2030 agenda. And the final work strand in that area is the work that I had mentioned, putting together a toolkit to allow for mainstreaming of decent work in various SDG aspects. So bottom line, communication capacity going stronger than the other two areas. Thanks.
Thanks, Wolfgang. Thank you. If everybody's fine then with the first two topics that we just have discussed, I would like to give the floor to Raki on UN funding, window opportunities and partnerships. Raki? Unmute, Lucky.
Thank you, Carl. Hello, colleagues. Want to do a very quick and pragmatic introduction to funding opportunities for the SDGs, taking into account that most of you have experimented what Alex has pointed out as need to work together in an integrated manner for the UN system, Wolfgang has also stressed in view of implementation plan of the 2030 agenda, in fact, focus on UN funding, on UN joint funding instruments. Why? Because for the SDGs and the 2030 agenda, clearly countries themselves will have to align their own resources to achieve the SDGs, but also UN assistance has to make the best out of the more and more scarce resources. When we see that the aid development financing landscape is completely changing with less ODA and more complex financing mechanism, it is clear, as also Alex pointed out in DOCO, that we are to do better with less, but also we need to draw on more diversified resources and enlarge our partnership basis to support the SDGs plan. As such, you see at country level that the countries will have to align their domestic public resources, but also their domestic and international private business and finance resources, the international development cooperation, the international trade and debt sustainability to be able to achieve the SDGs. For the UN, we will have to deliver the assistance, which calls for integrated work. When we see that for the SDGs, UN is to support the countries in mainstreaming the SDGs, to encourage system-wide learning on maps. UN assistance is to develop joint products that address the integrated nature of the 2030 agenda, and then assist governments in delivering the new dimensions of the 2030 agenda, such as inequality, environment concerns. It is clear that we will need to align all financing instruments available in the UN, meaning the single UN entity instruments as our core contribution, assessed contributions, but also aligning them with the UN joint funding instruments existing now. And there it is always a surprise for me to see that we are not accessing those pool funds who are to fill in our funding gaps and multiply the impact of our assistance. I'm always surprised to see so little proposals submitted for this under those funds through UNCT and under RC coordination. There are at least since 2004 we have had 143 of those pool funds with 8 billion almost administered by the multi-partner trust fund acting on behalf of UNDG. ILO has accessed, I think, around 140 million US dollar out of these 8 billion only, where under those funds 143 are of development, humanitarian and transition category. And as such, I would like to draw your attention on coming new funds, new generation of pool funds, which will allow us to work in an integrated manner at country level through UN programming, joint UN programming. And these are the Delivering Together facility and the MAPS fund, yet a lot of negotiation with potential contributors, but I think the Delivering Together facility has been open for RCs and UNCT to develop tools in this initial stage of the SDGs. So my surprise of lack of access of the ILO to those funds, just reminding that those funds have a fund governance which has a multi-partner approach regarding contributors, but also UN actors and national authorities and national implementing partners. So they are like, let's say between brackets, quite democratic, and something which will be, I suppose, multiplied depending on the pledges of the contributors of the development partners, because I think this is where we have a bottleneck, but it was foreseen by ECOSOC, UCPR, and SDGs discussion that the pool fund would be instrumental to have UN working in an integrated manner and making the best out of scarce resources coming to the UN. The joint program modalities are well known by some of our colleagues online, like Ali, who has initiated a large joint program, different modalities. The one which is used the most is the pass-through fund management. I would like, that is a really quick introduction, just to leave the floor and possibility for our colleagues to reflect on their experience in working together through pooled fund at country level, and maybe just also concluding that it is true that the guide, which I'm not sure it has been posted on the platform or within the document, the resources, is very useful, is the guide, the mainstreaming, the 2030 agenda for sustainable development, the guide for UN country teams. And if not, I will post it on the link of the Basecamp just for people to access. So please share your experience, and if you have any questions, please do so. Over to you. Thank you. Over to you, Carl.
Thank you, Raki. I will first open the floor for participants if they have a concrete question on accessing UN joint funding opportunities. Anybody with a practical question, maybe? If not, Raki, I actually have a question. Could you give us maybe a very concrete example on what it actually means accessing those joint funding opportunities at country level? Is it through our stronger embedding of our agenda at the UNDAP level? Is it more working at UNCT level? Is it through joint programming or together writing project proposals as a GP program, as a joint program?
My main point was following the presentation of the SDG, the maps, the UNDAPs and the SOPs, to show that the trend is working together at country level in an integrated manner. There will be no way back. So since several years, since 2008, reinforced by the ECOSOC resolution of 2012, it is now through. Sorry, there's a lot of noise. Somebody should mute. So there is now need for accessing those pool funds, but also for accessing, I think, any single source of funding, of having the priorities, the thematic, reflected first at country level, at UNCT level, in the programming of the assistance of the UN to the countries, so through UNDAF or through one UN program. They are now, in addition, in the delivery as one country. I think there are more than 50 DAO countries now. They are reflected in joint work plans also. Any access of those pool funds will happen only if, for example, ILO decent work country programs are reflected in the UNDAF, and they are joint design of joint program if you need to go at the project level with other agencies. This is the criteria for accessing all those pool funds, and I think in the future also all donors wanting to put money in a country or to allocate it to a specific agency, we look at the joint UN programming framework of assistance. So that's how you will access those pool funds. And as I was saying, we were very good at that several years ago, and now the rate of access of ILO to pool funds has reduced dramatically, showing that country office maybe don't have time and capacity anymore to go first to this joint programming exercise before getting to the design of joint programs. And this is why I wanted colleagues to tell us what are maybe the issues or challenges they have working at UN city level, even though we know we have questionnaire exchange ongoing, but maybe they have one experience they would like to share with us. Over to you, Carl.
Thank you, Aki.
Carl, can I react on that?
Please, Ali, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Raki. Actually, I'm very sorry for joining a little bit late because of the internet connection. Actually, this is so bad for me. At least I couldn't follow up with you since the beginning. As you know, I'm going to reflect on our in Yemen. Actually, the situation is very different and varies from what we are working in usual or in normal situations, where we don't have actually the entire country is under war situation and L3 humanitarian needs. We don't have actually UNDAF, the difficulties, political and security difficulties. All these things actually prohibiting us to deal or to operate as usual. As for our experience in the joint programming, as Raki thankfully mentioned, I would like just to say or to assure that this is a very important opportunity for ILO to take a part, and like what we have here in Yemen, we have a large-scale joint program project funded by EU, and we work with another 3 UN agencies to deliver a complementary assistance to the humanitarian products or assistance that provided in the country. So we just started the implementation early this year in March, and it seems the project is working very, very well. The key challenges that face us actually is more or less related to the higher upstream level and the downstream level at the working together within the UN agencies or at the UNCT. Actually, it's the competition that we faced between the humanitarian agencies and the development agencies, and especially when it comes to the funding issues. We also face another level of difficulty to working with the constituents, given that the constituents themselves have been affected and hit much by the crisis and the war. Even the Federation of Chamber of Commerce have been hit by one of the airstrikes. The building of the Federation of the Employers, the deputy of chairperson of worker trade union have been killed in another airstrike. So this is just to let you know how difficulty is that we are facing. Another level of difficulty at ILO presence on the country level should be, I think, enhanced, given that the bigger donor agencies are looking for those who are present on the ground, so that they have the comparative advantage to give them the fund to implement on their behalf. So the presence of the ILO is a key issue. The competition between the development and the humanitarian issues is a very key element to enable, our agenda to be dealt or to be followed up. We have also linked our activity to what other agencies are doing. So we are in a very strong relationship with other UN agencies such as UNDP, WFP, and FAO, and under this program, so that we are complementing each other, and it looks a very important opportunity to work together. So I think we need to also look for the engagement of our constituents for the after conflict or the post-conflict situation, since now it's the assessment of their situation, the identifying the priorities for the post-conflict. It's a key issue to ensure to sustain our support and assistance to them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ali. Yes, Alex, please.
I think Ali's point, Ali's contribution raised some very interesting points, and I think linked to some of what Baki was saying. So, indeed, I think that the key to the success of our work in settings such as Yemen is actually, as Ali was saying, collaborating, coming together, humanitarian actors and development actors, and understanding that we both need each other and that we need to work together to address the underlying drivers of conflict, etc. So this is where we're saying that the tools that we are working on in terms of common analysis, common planning, common risk assessments will hopefully help bring all these factors, at least at the UN level, together and have a system-wide understanding of what is driving conflict dynamics in places such as Yemen. Now, underlying all of that is the whole thing of funding, and Ali, made it very clear. At the end of the day, where you do have competition, and it's very difficult to work around that, is competition for resources. And I think there's where pool funding can be very effective. And as Raki was saying, there's a very strong push. I'm seeing this there right now. The next QCPR has been negotiated, and across the board, member states from north, south, east, and west agree that integrated financing frameworks, pool funding, might be the way forward. But this is also based on some very practical experiences. I know, for instance, that there was there was a common pool fund in Somalia, providing funding not only to UN agencies but also to the World Bank. And from what I understand, that was a very effective tool in sort of keeping some discipline within development and humanitarian actors, making sure that they were working together for common goals, and that resources were allocated based on needs and demands of recipient countries, and also on the expertise and the value added that different parts of the system and different development actors bring. So there I think pool funding and common funding frameworks can be very effective in ensuring integration across the humanitarian, peace and security, and development pillars. Over to you, Carl.
Thank you, Alex. I feel that the discussion is that we have to move from the competition, which is present in many countries, to actually look for complementarity between the UN agencies. Just to give you an example out of my own experience, I've worked many years on the topic of green jobs, and there we could see immediately that we actually have to work together, for example, with UNEP. And it's by teaming up with UNEP and ILO that it actually has translated in several, or at least in one big UN joint program, and other initiatives with, like, for example, PAGE is a partnership on action on the green economy, where you will see that a lot of different UN agencies come together, because it's that complementarity which makes our message stronger. And of course, everybody has then to focus on what is their added value or specific competitive advantage within the whole discussion. But I also have learned in the field that donors, they also like to prefer rather working with the UN than with specific agencies. You actually have some donors like Finland, I think that they really want to work with the UN and through joint programming, because it makes more sense. And also at the country level, we are looked upon as the UN and not necessarily as a single agency. And is there any more reactions from the floor in this regard? Okay, then I see it's now 4 o'clock, so time-wise we did it excellent, exactly 60 minutes. Before we close, I just want to reiterate again that please have a look at the DC Learning platform for additional information on the topics that we have discussed today. And then I would like to thank you for your time, for this hour that you've spent on the SDGs. I hope you liked it, and there's now an appetite for more information on the SDGs. And finally, Alex, Wolfgang, and Raki, thank you very much also for your time and for your expert input.
Thank you, Carl, for the invitation and for the opportunity to discuss it with colleagues in ILO.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you to everybody. Bye.
Bye. Oh la la.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.